Jimmy, I love you. Wilma was sitting by the bed of her husband, Jimmy. The progression of his illness had reached its last phase. But Wilma, who had been married to Jimmy for over 4 decades, just sat by his bed, repeating what she had said so often. Jimmy, I love you. They first fell in love during high school. And after Jimmy served in the Army, they were married, a young couple starting life together at the start of the 1960s. They set about creating a life together. Jimmy worked in a local factory. Wilma added inexpensive touches to their little apartment. They started to learn each other's habits, adjusting to married life. They were young and in love. Love had something new in store for them. The doctor announced that a child would soon arrive. So Jimmy and Wilma set up the nursery and wondered how the arrival of a child would change their lives. They would learn new things about love. Jimmy and Wilma made all the mistakes that first-time parents make, but eventually, with their son, a new routine settled in for the family, the 3 of them, loving each other. And for a while, it looked like this would be their future, the 3 of them. But then, another surprise. The doctor announced that another child was coming. They would learn new things about love again. Their daughter was born. Now there were 4 of them in the house. 2 years later, another daughter was born. Life was not like it was before, and they were learning new things about parenting and love. Eventually, the girls reached high school age, and this family seemed to have found its stride. And then came the day when Jimmy went to the doctor, and later the diagnosis came. He had multiple sclerosis. Their lives changed forever this time. Wilma became the breadwinner, and things changed for the children as they watched their father's health decline. They began to learn that love was requiring something new from them. Now, love required letting go of what used to be, learning the new skills of encouragement, patience, and caregiving. For the next 2 decades, Wilma took care of Jimmy. It certainly was not what she had envisioned on her wedding day. You don't anticipate such things when you're young and in love. But here she was now, the full-time breadwinner, the full-time caregiver. And what did she say about all of this? She simply said, I will do whatever it takes to love him. Until the day he died, she stayed by his side, tenderly saying, Jimmy, I love you. When couples stand before the altar and say, I do, they often think that they know what love will require in their lives. But over time, we begin to learn that our understanding of love must evolve and grow and deepen. Life requires that we let go of what we thought love means so that we can embrace the truth of love more generously and fully. With time, we learn that love is about sacrifice and selflessness. And just as people begin to wrap their heads and hearts around the reality of their vocation, then the first child comes along. And now there's a new vocation, parenthood. And all over again, we learn that love requires a lifetime of sacrifice and selflessness. Frankly, that's true of every vocation and calling in life, isn't it? Whether it's marriage or parenthood or friendship or ministry or just following Jesus. We think we know what we're getting into when we first say yes. Then life teaches us that we often have to let go of what we thought we knew in order to embrace the God-given vocation of love. In the first book of Samuel, we see that young Samuel literally has a vocation, that is, a calling. Asleep near the Ark of the Covenant, he hears the voice, "Samuel, Samuel." Since he's young and inexperienced in spiritual things, he assumes that old Eli is calling him. As this pattern is repeated through the night, young Samuel grows confused and maybe just a little tired from all this interrupted sleep. But Eli has learned a thing or two about God over the years, so Eli, the seasoned mentor, helps Samuel figure out what's going on. "You're being called by the Lord, Samuel." And remember, that word vocation literally means calling. So when you hear the voice again, say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." This is the beginning. This is the start of Samuel's vocation, the start of his lifelong love of God. So when the call comes again, Samuel says, "Speak, Lord." And the Lord does. And whatever initial excitement Samuel may have felt over this loving encounter with God, that may have quickly given way to Samuel asking himself, "What did I just sign up for?" Because when the Lord speaks to young Samuel, the Lord asks Samuel to deliver a hard and discomforting message to his mentor, old Eli. God has a word of judgment for Eli and his disobedient family. Samuel quickly learned that loving this God, listening to this God, was not always going to be easy. And he learned that lesson that he would encounter again and again through his life. Yes, Samuel loved the Lord, and the Lord loved him, clearly, but love required that Samuel had to let go of any hope of being the popular and beloved prophet of God. Again and again, as we read the scriptures, we find that Samuel had to announce a word of challenge, a word of warning to the people of Israel. Loving the Lord required sacrifice from Samuel. Samuel had to let go in order to love the Lord more faithfully throughout his life. You know, the Pharisees we encounter in the Gospels, they often get a bad rap from Christian preachers. In past sermons, I myself have painted the Pharisees with a very broad brush. We observe their careful attention to the law and then quickly criticize them for being too legalistic. As we read today's gospel passage, we might shake our heads and ask, how can they complain that Jesus and his disciples are plucking and eating a little grain? How can they complain about Jesus healing a man's hand on the Sabbath? How can they? But let's not judge the Pharisees just yet. After all, they were trying their best to love God. They too had a vocation, a calling, to love the Lord their God with all their heart and mind and strength. And since they wanted to love and serve God faithfully, they read what we call the Old Testament. There, they found instructions from God himself. There, they read that faithfulness to their calling could be expressed by carefully following the statutes and commands of God. God gave the commandments, to show us what life can look like as we live the covenant. So the Pharisees loved God, and they understood that loving God required careful observance of the law. And then along comes Jesus. He and his followers were causing quite a commotion. And yes, Jesus spoke of the love of our God, our Abba. But there was something new about Jesus' teaching. When Jesus talked about the love of God, he touched people's hearts and minds. Even the Pharisees, at least some of them, listened and were intrigued. But as they watched Jesus, they realized that Jesus' understanding of the love of God was different than what the Pharisees currently understood. If they were going to embrace Jesus' teaching, they would have to change. They may even have to let go of some of the things they thought they knew about God, let go of some of the things they thought they knew about loving God. Jesus constantly revealed a deeper truth about who God is and what the love of God means. As Jesus and his hungry disciples walked through the field of grain, maybe Jesus was revealing that God loves his children in such a way that God does not want our bellies to be empty. But to understand the love of God in that way might mean that the Pharisees would have to let go of certain ideas about the Sabbath. As Jesus healed in the synagogue, he was revealing a deeper truth about the love of God and what it means. By healing on the Sabbath day, maybe Jesus was showing us that in God's mind, every day is a great day to heal. Every day is a day for us to do what's right and good. After all, isn't God glorified when the suffering of one of God's children is alleviated? Again and again in the Gospels, Jesus says, I have not come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill it. Perhaps Jesus is inviting God's people to the next step in their vocation, to the next lesson in what love requires. Going deeper into the mystery of God's love always seems to require sacrifice, always seems to require that we be willing to let go of what we thought we knew so that we can embrace a more Christ-like love. Throughout the Gospels, some people seem to get it. When we first start loving the Lord and living our vocation, we may think that we know what love means. And then Jesus takes us deeper, shows us more, asks us to let go of what we thought we knew so that we can see the truth more clearly. Some embrace that vocation and are blessed. Some resist, trying to hold on to what they thought was the only way of being faithful and loving. Through the gift of the Spirit, you and I have a calling and a vocation from the Lord. Isn't it wonderful to be called by Jesus? Isn't it wonderful to have friends and mentors who can help us listen to the Lord and respond? And as we follow the Lord, He always wants to show us more and take us deeper and expand our vision. If we are paying attention, our understanding of loving the Lord is probably different now than when we first started. That growth in understanding often comes when the Lord asks us to let go of what we thought we knew in order to be surprised by His Spirit. Loving Him sometimes requires the hard task of letting go of some practices, certainties, convictions, attitudes, which, for a time in our lives, defined divine love for us. There's always something new to learn about love. Wilma discovered that in her lifelong vocation of love with Jimmy. Samuel discovered that in his lifelong vocation as a prophet. If we pay close attention to the words and deeds of Jesus, we're going to discover that he's constantly calling us to change and grow. Trust him even when the letting go is hard. And perhaps say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." And maybe even say to him, "Jesus, I love you. So teach me something new about what love means."